Hi, this is Dr. Steinmetz, and I just wanted to take a moment and thank my personal friend, Wayne Zivkak, for coming to talk with us a little bit about advanced care planning.
No problem.
So, Wayne, your experience with advanced care planning mainly involves your experience with caring for your father, I believe.
Yes. Yes, it does.
So, your father, who's Tony, right? What would you like us to know about Tony?
Well, Tony was very independent. He was 87 years old, lived on his own for after my mother passed away. So he really did things his own way and kind of knew his own mind. And I think the biggest thing about him is that he didn't like to lose control of things. He liked to be in control of most things. And so he got sick. He had a couple of mini strokes. He was living on his own. And at some point we began to talk about, what do you want to do, Dad? You know, because of the mini strokes, and probably in hindsight should have had this conversation sooner than later, because, again, he was 87 and you don't realize how quickly things can change. But because of these mini strokes, we sought out a lawyer who dealt with elder affairs and elder care, and she basically wrote up a living will and healthcare proxy. A living will basically telling Tony, explaining what he would like done, what measures he would like taken in case of an extreme illness, where there was a decision to be made about quality of life. She spoke with him. He made his wishes known, that there are things that he would like to do if he has a heart attack, certainly, try to resuscitate him and so on, but also things that if his quality of life deteriorated to a point where there wasn't any quality of life, then don't, no extreme measures. So don't take any extreme measures to go on beyond that. And so, and then his healthcare proxy was basically assigning me to make decisions about his health, with information from doctors, obviously, and making the best decisions for Tony and what we should do in terms of illness, doctor visits, or whatever. If for some reason he was unable to make those decisions, I would be able to make those decisions for him, again, with input from doctors and everything. This isn't just me working in a vacuum. It was me with information from doctors, my brother and sister's input as well. So it was basically an effort by all of us to make sure that his wishes were adhered to.
And I understand there was a time, unfortunately, and these are very difficult situations, when something happened and Tony was unable to speak for himself any longer. Is that right?
Yes, he ultimately suffered a severe stroke, but he was paralyzed, he couldn't speak, and he couldn't eat. So the conversation with the doctors was, okay, what are the steps? Even though I was the healthcare proxy, I had a conversation with my brother and sister about what do we want to do. He made no indication to us that he was actually understanding what we were talking about. But we had all of those instruments in place, the living will, the healthcare proxy, so we knew what his wishes were. And at that point, obviously, we're glad we did, because we knew what he wanted.
I also get an understanding of how much love that you obviously had for your father, as well as your brother and sister, to be able to come together and support him during that very difficult time and to try to make those very difficult decisions. How helpful was it to have that conversation with Tony before things took a turn for the worse? And how helpful was it to have a document?
Well, because we had the conversation about the living will and about his wishes, it became apparent to all of us that having Tony go to the nursing home, go to the hospital, and continue that cycle of nursing home, hospital. So I think for us, having that document that says, this is what my wishes are, clearly showed that this was a situation where we had to say, he wouldn't want to live like that. So at that point, we decided not to send him to a nursing home. He came back and lived with me, and my brother stayed at my house for probably about 4 or 5 days, maybe. That's the length that he lasted. So we were there. And so that the time that he was there was time that we were able to spend with him and talk to him, see him, as opposed to him being in a nursing home or something where you're going there to visit, and it was a more intimate situation.
Yeah.
A more family-oriented situation. So whether he could hear us or not, and he knew what we were saying, it was a much nicer situation. We had hospice come in who took care of him and took care of all his needs, and we were just there.
Wow, that sounds like you made the most of a difficult situation. You made some very difficult decisions, and you were able to have his final days in a peaceful area that perhaps would have preferred instead of a hospital, for instance, a nursing home like you mentioned. What advice would you have for other people who are coming into the doctor's office just for their physical and maybe thinking about advanced care planning? What would you?
Well, my advice would be to do it sooner than later. It's like a regular will. You can always change it if circumstances change. My advice would be do it when you are in a position, either yourself or with your parents, when they're in a position that they can make decisions, knowledgeable decisions, conscious decisions about what their plans are and what their desires are with their health care towards the end of their life, because you don't know when something could happen that could change all of that. Again, it's very similar to a regular will where, in an instant, you think you've got a long life to live, but in an instant, things can change. So I think if you make it sooner than later, it makes sense. And again, you can always change it. It's a very difficult conversation to have, and I know people think that we're talking about death here and you're still fairly young. Why are you even considering any of this stuff? But because you want to do it in a thoughtful way and not a situation where you have to make a decision now. If that wish isn't known in some kind of document, then you're asking your relatives, your sons and daughters, or your husband or whoever, to make those difficult decisions for you, and you have no input. And I think it makes sense for you to at least say, this is what I want. This is the kinds of things that I consider a quality of life, and these are the kinds of things that I consider just living.
Okay.
And I don't know if anybody wants to just live. I think they want to have some quality conversation.
Wow.
So.
Well, Wayne, thanks again. I really appreciate you sharing your story with us, and I thank you on behalf of our practice and
You're
our
welcome.
patients. All right,
Okay.
thanks.
You're welcome.